I really feel that Elizabeth Shue is much of the reason for my performance, because of her ability to anchor some of the more way out places that I went, and to bring what in her eyes looks like a genuine love to the movie. I was concerned that people wouldn't believe that this terrific woman would want to have anything to do with Ben Sanderson. And it really is testimony to her ability that she makes it seem believable that she does. If he had not gotten to this low point, he probably would never have discovered this true love. He was able to not put her in this judgmental little box that he might have put her in if he was at the top of his form. And so, ironically, he finds this true love and her heart for what it really is, not the package she comes in terms of her job, which is that she's a prostitute. Which is actually, I think, more than a lot of people can say. Yeah, he's doing himself in, he's in physical agony, but he has this true love, which he has discovered in that state. He's not in any pain now. He's in so much pain that he's let go, and he's floating, and he's liberated. I like to refer to him as crumbled elegance, that at one time he had this style about him, and that he was charming and maybe a little sophisticated, and that was what made him pseudo-successful in Hollywood, that he had this way about him. Now it's sort of imploding on him with the booze, and it's starting to fall apart, but there's little hints of it still there, although it's somewhat in tatters. You still get an idea of what may have been there. You see the shell of the man that once was. I tried to give him a sort of a continental elegance accent, you know, in the most, at certain times in the movie when he's really in a bad situation. It was a combination of observing what I consider to be all the great alcoholic performances and reading literature on alcohol and talking to drunks and talking to people in charge of institutes to cure the alcoholics. And I just sort of had this amalgamation of material and tried to put it together, think about, well, okay, what hasn't been done yet? What can I really show here that needs to be put on film that hasn't been put on film? My overall impression is that Mike Figgis is a composer and a musician, which is remarkable, because he scores his film, he writes his film, and directs his film. But for me, I've always approached acting, in my opinion, to be kind of a musical way. Even though I'm not a musician, I hear the lines, and I find a way of telling them with rhythms and cadences and all that. So to work with a musician director was this luxury, because we seem to communicate on that level.
I mean, I think he's just one of our most brilliant directors. I really, really do, and I feel so lucky that he gave me this gift of a part that he never auditioned anyone else for, and that's pretty amazing. In some levels it was very difficult to go through all of those emotions, but on the other hand, when you're acting, that's what you've always wanted to do. So it was easier for me because I was constantly in touch with my emotions, and when you're dealing with life and death situations like we were in the movie, you can't help but get focused immediately. I've always wanted to work with him, and I always have been attracted to his performances because of the kindness that he brings to all of his roles. And not all of them, but a lot of them. And he's just always so honest in his work, and at the same time very inventive and very imaginative. So I really had a strong feeling that we would work well together, and it just was an incredible experience to fall in love with, to have your character fall in love with a character like Ben, and for Nick to have brought him to life in such a beautiful way. I think she's very complicated and very simple at the same time. I think she is a real wounded soul who is clinging to hope in the midst of a lot of desperation. And she, I think, has gone into this world because she needs to be in this world to learn about who she is and what she needs. And she's very fragile, and she has kind of a tough exterior in the beginning of the movie, which kind of hides her fragility, and I think that that's part of the world she lives in. She happens to be a hooker, and he happens to be a drunk, but they could have been doing a million other things in their lives, and they still would have found this kind of love. I think it's a love story that is born in a very desperate world, so it's stripped bare of anything other than need. And in that simplicity is born its beauty and its poetry. I think these two people are not of the world, that there's a real mythic nature to their love, because they do unconditionally love each other through most of the movie. Shoes especially became like a really great metaphor for me, in terms of understanding the character, because they were really tall, 6 inches, and really thick. So I always had this strong foundation. They weren't like, that wobbly. But if I fell, like I really always fell. It's like, so it gave me this feeling of dignity and kind of pride. And at the same time, at any moment, I felt like I could fall.
About a man and a woman. He happens to be an alcoholic, she happens to be a hooker. But they're almost like two characters out of another period. If you can imagine two characters out of Scott Fitzgerald, a kind of quite dark but deeply romantic couple from, say, the kind of feeling of the 30s or the 20s, who have been somehow transported to the 90s and just dumped in the middle of Vegas, which is a cold, unfeeling, kind of unromantic town. But somehow they find each other, and this curiously strong romance develops, and is at the heart of the film. As soon as I read it, I thought this is not predominantly a story about alcoholism or prostitution. It's actually a deeply romantic love story. And I knew all along that my task would be to extract the love story. And film is very, very unforgiving, because, it started off as a novel, which you might take a couple of days to read, and ultimately it's going to be a story that you're going to watch in one sitting, in 2 hours. So you have to make your choices about, what's the emotional center of the film, and the emotional center of the film for me had to be that it was a love story. To me, Nicolas Cage has exactly the same quality for our generation and for this period of time as Cary Grant and Jimmy Stewart had for theirs. And those are very specific names. Those guys could do a variety of roles, some of them darker than others, but there was this sort of central charm and a believability and a sympathy to those guys that was very, very unique. And there aren't very, very many actors around now who have that quality. I believe Nick Cage has it in spades, and he's sort of on his own in that respect. Elizabeth Shue, who has created, if you like, her own baggage, or has had the baggage thrust upon her of the girl next door, this, very wholesome all-American girl, very, very pretty, very charming, and bubbling with a kind of positive energy, but has done the kind of roles that, that didn't really question or contradict anything in that image. She brings to the film that kind of, that energy and that, like Nicholas, that charm, despite the darkness of some of the areas of the film and so on. You have at the core a couple who have such positive energy for each other, and in a way for living, which is a contradiction to some of the elements of the film. So the idea of suddenly making a film almost like a documentary, where everything's the camera's on a tripod, there's no cranes, there's no dollies, there's no Lumar cranes, there's none of that stuff, and relatively uncluttered floor, just meant suddenly you had this momentum. And I'll tell you something, the actors adored it, because they got to act every day for 28 days with hardly a break.
Yuri is a Russian gangster, I suppose. He's a pimp. He's in with the mob in some way. Money laundering, drugs. I mean, he's pretty low life. But he's rather kind of innocent in a in a sad way. I mean, he's a brute, and I'm not suggesting that there's anything about him which is necessarily honourable or tender, but there is something I find slightly innocent about it. I'm a great fan of Mike Figgis, actually, and the fact that Mike was doing this piece made it attractive. Yuri is interesting because I haven't played a character like him before, but principally it was Mike's involvement with the material, with the Shah, which made it appealing.
The Man as a Russian, for me, was it was a matter of in a relatively short time, though not too short a time, and we had a couple of weeks, to try and formulate a sound which was both authentically a Russian accent and yet also the sound of somebody who'd been living in America and trying to some way Americanize himself for an uncertain period, a few years certainly. He's been around on both coasts, I think. I think of myself as someone who is trying to be an actor and always trying to learn from the acting I do, and somebody who enjoys acting very much and who has all my life. It looks beautiful. And I said to Mike, what's so exciting about Super 16? It looks like film. It doesn't look like a big TV. It doesn't look like video. It really feels like a craft you're using to create something very exciting. I mean, it's a sort of you really feel you're dealing with a medium and at a tactile and kinetic and emotional way all at the same time.